bag was a valuable possession to our pioneer mothers. In that bag was their whole life's collection of bits and pieces. A daughter's gown, a piece of a son's shirt, and even a nightgown. Well, when they made the 2,000-mile journey across the country, their scrap bag sat on the wagon seat beside them. Sisters kept in touch over the miles while sending scraps of their dresses to each other. Well, I've been reading Pieced from Ellen's Quilt by Linda Odo Lipset, and it's about Ellen Spalding Reed. And this is what she said. Ellen placed a piece of cloth from the new dress she was making inside the folded sheet of paper, and then she folded the paper over 3 times so that it would fit into the small envelope. Ellen knew that it would be a special piece of cloth from the Western country, and soon it probably would be cut and pieced into a block for her mother's or grandmother's new quilt. Mothers even willed their scrap bags to their daughters for future quilts. Well, gathering and exchanging scraps is a timeless tradition. Friends still swap blocks, and guild members trade their favorite pieces. Fabric clubs mail out swatches, and new quilts always have scrap leftovers. Well, that scrap bag never seems to get emptied. In this series, I have 4 quilts to show you. Now, they can all be made from scraps, or strips from your stash, or from newly purchased fabrics. Now, the first one is the jewel box. Loretta Smith dug through her bag and she came up with an amazing assortment of scraps. Oh, that light background. They're all sparsely scattered prints mixed with wonderful mediums and darks. And then the piano keys give it the finishing touch. Now the next one, the Kaleidoscope Quilt, looks wonderful in these scrappy reproduction prints. Sue Bouchard created this one. Now, even though the pattern appears curved, all the pieces are straight lines. Now in the next one, instead of the medium centers, I used light and light medium in the scraps. And now your eye travels from one kaleidoscope to the next. Well, we'll wander down the path of Nana's garden. Mackie made this one with bright primary colored scraps, and ooh, those colorful strips have a fresh look against the light background. The triple Irish chain is a traditional pattern, but it looks completely different with scraps, and then it's topped off with a Seminole border. Now, if you would like, you could go ahead and make a planned triple Irish chain. Now, once we learn how to make these 4 quilts, Cynthia Martin is going to show us how to add stippling to our quilts, as in this kaleidoscope. Oh, that dimension is wonderful. And we'll even tackle some free motion machine quilting in a clamshell design. Now, this is just a single Irish chain in those solid blocks. And I also have some historical Kansas City blocks to show you before I can get started. Now, I need to spend some time organizing my scraps, so please join me and we'll see what scrap pieces we can put together for new quilts. Quilters often take their quilt fabric right from the quilt shop and throw it into the washer and dryer before they even start. They pre-wash their fabrics and then dry it. Now, if you've already cut it into pieces, it's a little hard to pre-wash scraps. So you won't be washing your scraps until your quilt is completed. Sometimes dark fabrics as dark navies, reds, and greens sometimes bleed in your wash water. You can see that red dye in there, and that dye gets into your light background fabric and you want to get it out. Well, you can set your colors just by pouring 1/4 cup of vinegar in your wash water, or how about some salt? You can do the same thing. I like to wash my quilts with Orvis soap, and Orvis soap is a very gentle soap that's used to wash horses. You can get it in the quilt shop, or you can even buy it in the feed store. Now, if you wash your quilt and it bleeds a little bit, you can wash it a second or third time and not dry it in between. You might even get those stains out. It'll be perfect. Now, if you want to do some whitening, I like to use sodium perborate. Ooh, it is wonderful for taking antique pieces of lace. You can just put 4 tablespoons in your wash load, let it soak. You'll come out with the best white laces. My Aunt Donna found that beautiful antique lace at a yard sale, and speaking of yard sales, she found me this great basket of scraps. Now, I do like to use 100% cotton fabrics, and it's hard to tell what this quilt maker was cutting. So I'm just going to do some testing. Ooh, it's fun to do. Now, you can go ahead and test it by burning it. Now, since I'm going to be using fire, be sure and do it in the kitchen, on the kitchen sink. My goodness, you wouldn't want to burn up your quilt room, would you? So just go ahead. Now, I know this one is polyester. We're going to see that very easily. But whenever you burn polyester, just go ahead and fray that in. Ooh, we've got it really going there. But you see, when you touch it, there's this hard, nubby feel to it. It actually melted, that plastic just melted right in there. Easy to see. Go ahead and test that one. Now, let's try some cotton. A little bit different. So whenever you take cotton and test it just by burning those fibers, that flame just burns in there quickly. And it's a little harder to put out. Look at that. This is just like a candle wick. Now, once you've got the flame out, you actually see that you can fray it and pull out those threads so that you can see them. Great, easy to tell with cotton. Now, it's a little bit harder to tell with polyester blends, but feel it. You'll feel just a little bit of hardness in it. Now, I was also testing some wool. Pretty amazing. This wool doesn't burn at all. I love it. Well, I have a great selection of quilts that I've showed you. I've already made them all for you, and what a collection of scraps I have left over from them. Now, you can divide your scraps up a number of different ways. I've divided mine up according to age periods. Oh, those 1860s to 1880s reproduction fabrics are just great. You might remember the bits and pieces that I made, all those dark, rich colors. Oh, they're wonderful. And then the Pioneer Sampler, I used that same fabric line. I have a great box of scraps left over from them. Now, some of these are the strips left over from bits and pieces. They're 2.5-inch strips. I'm going to cut back to 2 1/4 inches. And I also have quite a few pieces of fabric that are narrow, but go salvage to salvage. This is perfect for triple Irish chain. Ooh, I'll have a rich, handsome quilt out of those scraps. I also love the reproduction fabrics from the 1930s. Feed sacks, my favorite. You might remember the grandmother's fan. Oh, just perfect in those tiny pieces. And then the Dresden Plate, finished off with the lattice and cornerstones. Dutch windmill, or I affectionately call hearts and gizzards. And I'm especially fond of sunbonnet Sue. Well, most of these patterns are appliques. And you cut all those curves and little pieces out. What a crazy box of scraps this is. All odd shapes and sizes. Now, this box is perfect for a jewel box. I'm going to go ahead and cut these pieces up into 5.5-inch squares, make a great country quilt. And this fabric, oh, I love. I hope I never run out of it. Now, I've also taken my large-scale floral prints. I've grouped those together in just a wonderful selection. I want to go ahead and use those in Nana's Garden. Now, those are left over from Winning Hand, large-scale floral, and then that almanac quilt. I love that floral border I used around the outside edge. Now, in Nana's Garden, we're just going to go tiptoeing right through those tulips. Now, you should also put together a great collection of background fabrics. You can go ahead and use medium. You can use solid muslin. You can use small scale, white on white, tone on tone, large scale, and that medium tone, whatever. It's going to look great. Now, you can also divide your scraps up according to color. Now these are hand-dyed fabrics, and Kaleidoscope is just calling me for this one. All pretty similar in color. Probably won't use this one. I think that's one I'll just take out. Well, talk about taking out a piece of fabric. Look at this. You should just go ahead, take your scraps, lay them out on your floor, someplace you can see them, walk past them a couple of times a day, look and check. And if there's one that is sticking out, now in this stack to me, this one is sticking out, go ahead and get rid of it. Don't use it in your quilt. Get them all arranged. Oh, great to work with your scraps. So many quilts and not enough time. This box is such a mess. I can't wait to get into it and get it organized. Now, does your box of scraps look like this? What a mess. Well, at least we don't have to use templates like this woman did. Trace around these templates. Look at this shape. Right here, she's got her instructions written right on it. Another odd shape. And ooh, this is my favorite template, a butterfly with all of these pinholes in it. She drew around it and cut it out with a pair of scissors. Well, this is an envelope from 1939. It says right here, Jen's Quilt Patterns. And look at this, U.S. postage for 1.5 cents. Now, does that mean that you have to buy 2 stamps for 3 cents? I'm not sure. But at least I'm getting my fabrics all organized for my scrap jewel box. 5.5-inch squares. Now these are all the pieces left over from the Dresden Plate, from the Sunbonnet Sue. And even though they're all odd shapes, what I'm doing is lining up those outside edges so I still have some straight on the grain pieces. And since you can go ahead and cut so many layers with your rotary cutter, stack several up like this and then just press them as you line them up. Make sure you've got all those torn edges together. Ooh, lots of steam. And look at this. My iron is on its own circuit, so I'm not blowing my sewing machine. Now, if you're cutting squares, the best thing to use is a turntable. Then you can turn your squares and not actually pick them up and move them. I like to use a 6-inch square ruler for the 5.5-inch square. So go ahead and drop it on your turntable right in the center and cut it first oversized. I'm going to just go up and over on 2 sides. Then you can go ahead, well, how about I get that corner there? That would be really great. Okay, so you don't have to pick up your pieces. Just turn your table right around, get it back to the other side. Went 1 turn too many. Now, 5.5 inches, line that square up, up, and over. And that way, you've got some great straight pieces. Now, I've got my squares going, got a nice stack, but my strips are another story. I'm getting those lined up, ready for sewing. This is my jewel box strips, and they're cut at 5.5 inches. Kaleidoscope is cut at 5 inches, just a little narrower, and oh, we're going down in size. Triple Irish chain is 2.25 inches, those rich dark colors. And look at Nana's Garden out of those multi-floral prints, 1.5-inch strips. Oh, we're just going from wide to narrow. Now, cutting strips is a little different. You want to think about the ergonomics. You can just go ahead and use the rotary cutter and the ruler. 6-inch by 24-inch ruler is best for cutting strips, and you do need to have a long mat to do that. But you might want to try the ruler cutter combination tool. It's great, particularly if you have arthritis and you don't need to have quite as much coordination. Now I'm just going to go ahead and take this. I have the torn edges on this strip, lined it up so that I still have the straight of the grain. I just want to line up the rotary cutter so that it's just right on that torn edge and just cut off the torn, bruised edge and just get rid of it. Now, for Irish chain, triple Irish chain, want to cut 2.25-inch strips. So you just move that over, line it up carefully at 2.25 inches. Actually, this is great for people that have maybe Parkinson's disease, even for children, because it's very safe. You never get your fingers near that blade. So just get your triple Irish chain cut up, get those all organized. Now cutting those little narrow 1.5-inch strips for Nana's garden might be a little tricky, especially if your site is getting a little less than it used to be when you were a young chicken. Anyhow, this is a different cutting system that's great for cutting narrow strips. Now I have my fabric already folded in fours. Here's the torn edge here, and here's the salvage edge right along here, so that it's quite a bit narrower than I was cutting the long strips. And just take this cutting system and lay it on top and line up one straight edge along the fold. Ooh, that looks good. And right over here at 0, I'm just going to go ahead, drop my blade into the slot and cut away. So I trimmed off that torn edge. Now the slots are 1/2 inch apart, so I'm just going to move over to 1.5 inches. Gosh, this is great, even if you can't see. Over 1.5 inches more, just drop it in there and just keep on cutting right across there. For sure, I'm going to have everyone straight. Well, maybe I better take a look. That's the important part. Whenever you cut your strips and you open them up and they go straight across, well, I'm going to just go back, cut up all my stash into strips, and I'll be ready to go on. I found this box of quilt patches in an antique store in Harmony, Pennsylvania, and it is by far my favorite box of patches, and I think it's because Mrs. Zinkman spent hours with her templates and scraps cutting out all of these tiny little pieces, and the best thing is her stamp only cost her 1 cent. Well, one of my favorite patterns in here is goose egg, and this piece says cut plain. This one says cut fancy, and they fit right in there together. Well, she spent hours cutting out all of these fancy little half eggs using all of those pretty prints, but I wish she would have spent some time cutting out those muslin pieces, but she didn't. So I got some muslin feed sacks, cut out that piece, added those half eggs right in there, and then when you take and you sew all those pieces together, ooh, it makes just a great 1930s pattern. Those half eggs sewn together, quite colorful, perfect. I can't wait to finish it. Actually, I'd like to hand quilt it. Well, she spent hours cutting out templates. She has 2 more quilts in here as well. Now this is 2-inch squares, probably for Irish chain, maybe even for triple Irish chain. She has a second stack of pieces as well. Now this is the Dresden Plate. What a stack of perfect pieces that she's cut. Now I wish that I could get all of my fabric, all of my scraps, all of my pieces into this cardboard box, but oh, I have way too much to organize. So I take and I list all of my blocks and fabrics in a notebook, make a list of inventory so I can find everything. Now the best thing for you to do would be to put it on your computer so you can always find it. And I also take my antique catalogs, put them in a top-loading protector sheet so I can find those as well. Now, photographs. I have all stacked in a box, stacks of photos of quilts I've made and quilts I intend to make. Oh, I'm looking forward to this. Carolina Lily is going to be beautiful. Well, I like to buy old things and store my fabric in them, create that general store atmosphere. Now, old sewing drawers, old sewing machine drawers are perfect for putting your collection of fabrics. You can bundle them up according to color, according to time period. Oh, put some whimsical fabrics in there, they look great. Now, another item perfect for storing fabric is an old chest or an old dresser. I have all of my Nana's Garden all in here, set to go, labeled right here, 1.5-inch strips lined up, just waiting for the moment to sew them together. And I also have triple Irish chain labeled, all of those handsome dark prints, extra fabric as well. Now you can also put your sewing supplies in old canning jars. Oh, who says you have to put tomatoes in those jars? Now right here I have my mother's wooden spools of thread I've collected and saved through the years, and also needle cases from all over the state, all in different colors. Now every family has that button jar, ooh, just full to the top of all types of buttons. And then the next one actually are 1-inch safety pins and a pinning tool, just waiting for that next quilt you're going to finish. And I like to put antique laces in canning jars as well. It keeps them clean and you can readily see what's inside the jar. Now, storing fabric can find all kinds of different containers for them. Associate the fabric with a container. Right here, that green from the 1930s has all of the reproduction feed sack fabrics in it. Actually, these pieces are so small, I don't know what to do with them. And the Great American can has all the stars and the stripes just waiting for the 4th of July. And the leftover Christmas cookie box, of course, scraps of Christmas fabric. Now I do have a Coates & Clark thread cabinet, long skinny drawers, just perfect for putting your tools you use now, perhaps some collections of some antique tools. Now I did find these diamond yo-yos. Oh, they were all sewn together, just waiting for me to make some ecru yo-yos to set them all together. But I can't do this without some modern tools. You might want to have in your daytime a fluorescent light over your shoulder, just lighting your area. And at night, you might want to use a halogen lamp just so you can see everything perfectly. And oh my goodness, at night, do I need help seeing? Well, how about some magnifying glasses? You can put on, perfect for watching TV and doing your close-up work at the same time. Now, if I can thread the needle with this at night and get my yo-yos done, boy, am I happy. Well, all of these modern tools are just great to have. Why don't we spend some time now, bridge the gap, and look at some beautiful scrap antique quilts. Many beautiful quilts came right from the scrap bag, and this is a whole garden from scraps. This is Grandmother's flower garden. Oh, I just love the way the quilt maker did it. She used beautiful pinks or yellows right in the center of her flower, and then some white around the outside edge. It looks like a white daisy, and then more floral prints surrounding it, and then there's that green meandering path all through the garden. Well, this is just a quilt top, and I think perhaps the quilt maker was waiting for a few extra dollars so she could send it out to a quilting group. Now, often the women from the Methodist Church would get together, hand quilt these tops, and only charge 2 cents for 1 yard of quilting thread. You know, with just a couple of dollars, a person could get their whole quilt finished. Now this quilt is called Ocean Waves, and it was identified by the Ladies Art Company in 1898. It's also called Tents of Armageddon and 1,000 Triangles, and boy, it looks like 1,000 triangles, doesn't it? Now when I look at the pieces, I think that it was done over a time period. Right here, one orange, oh, polka dot, and then the border is a second orange right next to it. Now this piece, the indigo blue, was probably from the 1860s, the 1880s, and then it's kind of confusing because this looks like the 1930s. Can you imagine having a scrap bag around for about 50 years? Oh my goodness. Well, this one is called Kansas Dugout. Now this was identified by Aunt Martha's studio in the 1930s, and it's also known as Ozark tile. Oh, it's just a great pattern running through there. Now you can see that the one piece that ties it together is this brown square. It actually reminds me of bow tie throughout the quilt. Now there's so many different fibers in it. I certainly don't think that the quilt maker took a match and tested these pieces for cotton, but it's a great, wonderful quilt. Now the next one is a string quilt. This is a perfect scrap quilt out of the reds and the blues. And what the quilt maker would do is take maybe sleeves or pajama legs or some part of the clothing that wasn't quite worn, some piece that was a narrow piece, sew those pieces together, and then once they were stringed together, you would cut them into a square. It's very thick. It has cotton batting hanging in there. Look at this. This is a new piece of fabric and a recent repair. And I can see that there's very thick thread right through there, quilting it all together. Now, I've been told that quilt makers would often take feed sacks like this, a muslin feed sack, and then the chain stitching that held it all together would just be unraveled. It's actually quite thick, and if you get hold of just the right thread, you can pull that out, and that's what they use for the hand quilting. So when life gives us scraps, we'll make beautiful quilts together.